The December snow crunched under my boots as I walked up the familiar driveway to my sister-in-law Margaret's house in suburban Chicago. The red brick colonial was already glowing with warm yellow light from every window, and I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation through the frost-covered glass. My breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as I adjusted my grip on the wine bottle. I'd brought a modest Cabernet that had cost me more than I wanted to admit on my fixed income. "Dad, you okay?" my son Michael asked, falling into step. Beside me, at 32, he towered over my 5-foot Tate frame, his broad shoulders filling out his navy peacoat. He'd driven down from Milwaukee with his wife Sarah and their twin 8-year-olds, Emma and Jake. Fine sun, just cold. I forced a smile, though the knot in my stomach had been tightening since we'd pulled into the driveway. These family gatherings had become increasingly difficult since Linda passed away 3 years ago. Without her warm presence beside me, I felt like an outsider looking in at a life that used to be mine. Sarah appeared at my other side, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "The kids are so excited to see Grandpa Joe," she said, squeezing my arm gently. "They've been talking about your war stories all week." I chuckled despite my nerves. "They're not war stories, sweetheart. Just old man stories that happened to involve the army." The front door swung open before we could knock, revealing Margaret's perfectly coiffed blonde hair and her trademark strained smile. At 55, she still carried herself like the sorority president she'd been 30 years ago, all sharp angles and calculated charm. "Well, look who finally made it," she exclaimed, though her eyes didn't quite match her enthusiasm. Come in, you must be freezing. Joe, let me take that coat. Oh, and the wine. How thoughtful." She accepted the bottle with the same tone she might use to thank a child for a finger painting. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey, with underlying notes of expensive candles and Margaret's signature perfume. The living room was a showcase of holiday perfection. A 12-foot Fraser fir dominated one corner, draped in gold and burgundy ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Every surface gleamed, from the polished hardwood floors to the crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. My brother Tom appeared from the kitchen, scotch in hand, and his perpetual look of mild irritation firmly in place. At 60, he'd grown soft around the middle, his once dark hair now silver and thinning. His handshake was firm but brief, like he was checking an item off a list. "Joe, good to see you. How's retirement treating you?" The question came with an edge, as if retirement was something shameful rather than earned after 4 decades of work, 20 in the Army, 20 more as a high school history teacher. "Can't complain," I replied, though the truth was more complicated. Retirement on a teacher's pension and military benefits wasn't exactly luxurious, especially with rising medical costs and the mortgage on the small ranch house Linda and I had. Bought in our optimistic 50s, the house filled with the sounds of family, children's laughter echoing from the basement playroom, women's voices chattering in the kitchen, men's deeper tones discussing football scores and stock portfolios. In the living room, I found myself drifting between groups, never quite settling anywhere. Like a ghost at my own family gathering, Margaret's 2 daughters, Jessica and Ashley, were both in their 20s now, fresh out of college, with their expensive educations and entry-level jobs at marketing firms. They spoke in that peculiar dialect of young professionals. Everything was amazing, or literally the best, or so random. They acknowledged me with polite smiles and quick hugs before returning to their conversations about weekend trips, 2 New York and yoga classes. Tom's son Bradley, 28 and fresh from his MBA program, dominated the conversation near the fireplace. He wore his success like a badge, the Rolex, the Italian leather shoes, casual mentions of his downtown loft and his girlfriend's connections in the art world. When he looked at me, I could see him calculating my net worth and finding it wanting, Joe. "Still living in that little place on Maple Street?" he asked with what he probably thought was genuine interest. "Same house for 15 years, I confirmed. "Linda loved that garden." Right. "Well, property values in that area have been ... interesting lately." He said interesting the way other people might say unfortunate. The afternoon wore on, like this polite conversation that somehow made me feel smaller with each exchange. I helped where I could, carrying dishes from the kitchen to the dining room, refilling ice buckets. Listening to Emma and Jake's excited chatter about their new video games. But increasingly, I felt like I was watching the family from behind glass. Present, but not really part of the warmth and connection flowing around me. When Margaret announced that dinner was ready, I followed the crowd toward the dining room, expecting to find my usual spot at the main table. Instead, I stopped short when I saw the seating arrangement. The large mahogany table was set for 8. Tom and Margaret at the heads, their children and spouses filling the sides. A smaller card table had been set up in the corner, decorated with a cheerful red tablecloth and smaller plates. "Joe, we put you over there with the kids," Margaret said brightly, gesturing toward the little table where Emma, Jake, and their 2 young cousins were already settling in with booster seats and sippy cups. "I thought you'd enjoy their energy. And honestly, we just ran out of room at the big table. You understand?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there for a moment, processing the reality of what she'd just said. At 67 years old, after everything I'd done, everywhere I'd been, I was being relegated to the children's table like I was 10 years old myself. I glanced around the room, looking for support, for someone to recognize the absurdity of the situation. Tom was already settling into his chair, pointedly avoiding eye contact. The younger adults were checking their phones or adjusting napkins, suddenly fascinated by anything other than my humiliation. Of course, I heard myself say, my voice steady, despite the burning in my chest. No problem at all. But as I walked toward that little table in the corner, past the adults who couldn't meet my eyes, I felt something inside me break just a little bit more, sitting at that small card table, surrounded by children discussing Pokemon cards and playground politics. I felt the full weight of my invisibility settle over me like a heavy blanket. The cheerful red tablecloth couldn't disguise what this was, a clear message about where I ranked in this family hierarchy. Emma, bless her heart, kept trying to include me in her animated story about her school's Christmas play. But her 8-year-old enthusiasm only highlighted the absurdity of my situation. From my corner position, I had a perfect view of the main table where the real adults sat. Margaret was holding court, discussing her latest charity board appointment with the kind of animated gestures that suggested she considered it groundbreaking work. Tom was nodding along, occasionally contributing details about their recent kitchen renovation, a $40,000 project that they'd mentioned.
"Oh, no fewer than 5 times since I'd arrived."
And then the contractor said the marble we'd chosen was back-ordered for 6 weeks, Margaret was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the room. I told him that was simply unacceptable. We're having the Hendersons over for New Year's, and everything has to be perfect. Bradley was describing his recent promotion to his cousins, his voice confident and loud. The firm is expanding into international markets, and they've asked me to head up the European division transition. It's a huge opportunity, probably. Means relocating to London for a year or 2. "That's incredible, Bradley," Jessica gushed. "You're so talented. I mean, to get that kind of responsibility at your age." I cut my turkey mechanically, the meat suddenly tasting like cardboard. Jake was trying to show me his new action figure, small plastic soldier that bore no resemblance to any military equipment I'd ever seen. But his excitement was genuine. I found myself engaging with his innocent questions about whether real soldiers carried laser guns. "Grandpa Joe, did you really fight in wars?" he asked, his eyes wide with the kind of fascination only children could muster. "I served in the army for 20 years, I said quietly, aware that my voice might carry to the main table. "I was deployed several times, including Desert Storm and later in Afghanistan." Emma looked up from her mashed potatoes. "What's Desert Storm?" Before I could answer, Margaret's voice cut across the room with practiced precision. "Children, let's not talk about violent things during our nice dinner. Joe, maybe save those stories for another time?" The dismissal was swift and final. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, not just for myself, but for my grandchildren, who were being taught that their grandfather's service was something inappropriate for polite conversation. Jake's confused expression as he looked between me and Margaret broke my heart a little more. Sitting at that small card table, surrounded by children discussing Pokemon cards and playground politics, I felt the full weight of my invisibility settle over me like a heavy blanket. The cheerful red tablecloth couldn't disguise what this was a clear message about where I ranked in this family hierarchy. Emma, bless her heart, kept trying to include me in her animated story about her school's Christmas play, but her 8-year-old enthusiasm only highlighted the absurdity of my situation. From my corner position, I had a perfect view of the main table where the real adults sat. Margaret was holding court, discussing her latest charity board appointment, with the kind of animated gestures that suggested she considered it groundbreaking work. Tom was nodding along, occasionally contributing details about their recent kitchen renovation, a $40,000 project that they'd mentioned no fewer than 5 times since I'd arrived. And then the contractor said the marble we'd chosen was back-ordered for 6 weeks. Margaret was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the room. I told him that was simply unacceptable. We're having the Hendersons over for New Year's, and everything has to be perfect. Bradley was describing his recent promotion to his cousins, his voice confident and loud. The firm is expanding into international markets, and they've asked me to head up the European division transition. It's a huge opportunity, probably. Means relocating to London for a year or 2. That's incredible, Bradley, Jessica gushed. You're so talented. I mean, to get that kind of responsibility at your age. I cut my turkey mechanically, the meat suddenly tasting like cardboard. Jake was trying to show me his new action figure, small plastic soldier that bore no resemblance to any military equipment I'd ever seen. But his excitement was genuine. I found myself engaging with his innocent questions about whether real soldiers carried laser guns. Grandpa Joe, did you really fight in wars? He asked, his eyes wide with the kind of fascination only children could muster. I served in the army for 20 years, I said quietly, aware that my voice might carry to the main table. I was deployed several times, including Desert Storm and later in Afghanistan. Emma looked up from her mashed potatoes. What's Desert Storm? Before I could answer, Margaret's voice cut across the room with practiced precision. Children, let's not talk about violent things during our nice dinner. Joe, maybe save those stories for another time? The dismissal was swift and final. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, not just for myself, but for my grandchildren, who were being taught that their grandfather's service was something inappropriate for polite conversation. Jake's confused expression as he looked between me and Margaret broke my heart a little more. The conversation at the adult table moved on seamlessly. Ashley was discussing her recent trip to Europe with her boyfriend, trust fund baby whose primary occupation seemed to be collecting vintage motorcycles. Her animated description of their week in Tuscany included detailed accounts of wine tastings and boutique hotels that cost more per night than I'd made in a week as a teacher. The views from our villa were absolutely breathtaking, she continued. We had our own private chef, and the infinity pool overlooked these rolling hills covered in vineyards. It was like something out of a movie. How wonderful for you, dear, Margaret beamed. Young people should travel while they can, see the world, experience different cultures. I thought about the traveling I'd done in my 20s convoy. Duty through the Iraqi desert, sleeping in bunkers, eating MREs while sand got into everything. I'd seen different cultures too, though under circumstances that didn't involve infinity pools and private chefs. But apparently those experiences weren't dinner table appropriate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat at the children's table, while these young adults, barely out of college, were treated as sophisticated world travelers and business leaders. My 2 decades of military service, my years teaching American history to teenagers, my Bronze Star medal sitting in a drawer at home, none of it seemed to matter in this polished dining room. Tom was now discussing his golf handicap with Bradley, their conversation peppered with references to exclusive country clubs and expensive equipment. I finally broke 80 at Riverside last month, Tom announced proudly. Been working with a new instructor, former pro, who charges a fortune, but it's worth it. That's fantastic, Dad, Bradley replied. I've been meaning to get out to Riverside. Heard the greens are immaculate. Margaret nodded approvingly.
Tom
deserves his golf time. He works so hard at the firm. All those late nights and weekend calls, it's the price of success. I remembered my own late nights and weekend calls during my Army years, but those had been about real emergencies. life and death situations that required split-second decisions, not client complaints about stock performance or partnership negotiations. But those memories seemed irrelevant here, relegated to the same category as Jake's action figures. The dinner continued with me growing smaller in my corner, listening. 2 discussions about vacation homes and private schools, investment portfolios, and social club memberships. Each topic was another reminder that I existed in a different economic reality. One where splurging meant buying name-brand groceries instead of generic, or a nice dinner out cost $30 instead of $300. Sarah, lesser, tried to include me in the conversation a few times. She asked about my volunteer work at the Veterans Administration Hospital. But her questions were quickly drowned out by Margaret's announcement about their upcoming cruise to the Caribbean. "We've booked the penthouse suite," Margaret was saying. "It has its own private balcony and concierge service. The travel agent said it's the same level of luxury as the Four Seasons." I thought about the veterans I visited at the VA hospital, men and women who'd given their youth, their health, sometimes their limbs in service to their country. Many of them spent their days in wheelchairs, struggling with PTSD, fighting bureaucracy for basic medical care. But their sacrifices, like mine, seemed to belong to a different world than this one. As the meal wound down and conversation turned to dessert and coffee, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with this family. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being erased. My experiences and contributions deemed unworthy of adult acknowledgement. The children around me continued their innocent chatter, unaware of the broader dynamics at play. But I could feel Michael's eyes on me from across the room, could see the tension in his jaw as he watched his father being treated like a burden rather than a guest. The storm building in my son's expression told me this Christmas dinner was far from over. The tension in the room was palpable as dessert was served, though I seemed to be the only one fully aware of it. Margaret had brought out her famous apple pie, a recipe she'd inherited from her mother and guarded like a state secret. The adults at the main table were lavishing praise on the flaky crust and perfect spice blend, while I sat cutting small pieces for Emma and Jake, who were more interested in the vanilla ice cream slowly melting beside their untouched pie. I could see Michael's jaw working as he listened to his uncle launch into another story about his latest business triumph. My son had always been perceptive, even as a child, and I knew he was reading the room the same way I was. Sarah kept shooting concerned glances in my direction, her natural empathy making her uncomfortable with the obvious slight I'd endured. "Henderson deal alone will bring in close to $2 million in revenue," Tom was saying, his chest puffed with pride. Of course, it took months of negotiation, countless late nights, but that's what separates successful people from. He paused, seeming to realize he was about to say something potentially offensive, then finished lamely, "From those who don't push themselves." Margaret nodded sagely. "Success requires sacrifice. Not everyone understands that level of dedication." Implication hung in the air like smoke. I felt it settle over me, another layer of dismissal to add to the evening's collection. Here I was, a man who'd spent his career in service first to his country, then to his community's children, being lectured about dedication by people. His biggest sacrifice was choosing between vacation destinations. Bradley was now explaining his investment strategy to his rapt cousins, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never known real financial insecurity. "The key is diversification," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "You can't put all your eggs in one basket. That's why I've got holdings in tech, real estate, commodities." I thought about my own investment strategy, hoping my pension and Social Security would stretch far enough to cover my medications and property taxes. The stock market had always seemed like gambling to me, and after watching too many fellow teachers lose their retirement savings in various market crashes, I'd stuck to safer, smaller returns. Apparently that made me financially naive in this crowd. Emma tugged on my sleeve, pulling me back to the present. "Grandpa Joe, can you tell me about the medals?" "What medals, sweetheart? The ones in your dresser drawer? Mom showed them to me once when we were visiting. She said you got them for being brave." A hush fell over the main table. I could feel their attention shift to our corner, though whether from genuine interest or annoyance at the interruption, I couldn't tell. "Those are service medals," I said gently. Every soldier gets them for doing their job. But Mom said one was special, the bronze one with the star. Before I could respond, Margaret's voice cut across the room again. Children, why don't you go wash up? Adults need to discuss grown-up things. The dismissal was automatic, reflexive, but this time it included me, by implication. I was being lumped in with the 8-year-olds, my military decorations reduced, to the same level as Jake's action figures. That's when I saw, Michael stand up. My son had inherited my height, but his mother's fierce protectiveness. When he was angry, his whole presence seemed to expand, filling whatever space he occupied. Right now he was very angry. Actually, Margaret, he said, his voice carrying a new edge that made everyone at the table look up. I think it's time. The children, and everyone else, heard about those medals. Michael, really, this isn't necessary, Margaret began, but my son was just getting started. No, I think it is necessary. He moved around the table, positioning himself where everyone could see him clearly. Since we're talking about success and dedication and sacrifice, I think everyone should know exactly what kind of man is sitting at that children's table. Tom cleared his throat uncomfortably. Son, maybe we should just that man, Michael. Continued, pointing directly at me. Served 20 years in the United States Army. 20 years. He enlisted when he was 18 years old and spent 2 decades defending the freedoms that allow all of us to sit here in comfort, discussing our stock portfolios and vacation homes. I felt my face burning, part embarrassment, part pride, part something I couldn't quite identify. Michael, you don't need to. Yes, I do, Dad. His voice was strong, clear, carrying to every corner of the room. Because apparently some people have forgotten what real service looks like. The room had gone completely silent. Even the children seemed to sense that something important was happening. Sarah was watching her husband with obvious pride, while the others looked uncomfortable, caught between social politeness and their obvious desire to change the subject. Michael wasn't finished. That bronze star Emma mentioned. He earned it in Desert Storm when his convoy came under attack and he left his protected position to help wounded soldiers. He could have stayed safe, but he didn't, because that's who he is. I remembered that day, the acrid smell of smoke, the chaos of an ambush, the weight of Sergeant Rodriguez in my arms as I carried him to safety. It had seemed like the only thing to do at the time, nothing heroic, just necessary. But hearing my son describe it now, seeing the respect in my grandchildren's eyes, I felt something shift inside me. And after his military service, Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. He spent 20 more years teaching high school history, teaching your children and your neighbors' children about the country he'd already bled for. He shaped young minds, inspired dozens of students to pursue higher education, to think critically about their world. The adults at the main table were studying their dessert plates now, unable to meet Michael's steady gaze. But I could see wheels turning, consciences stirring, the comfortable narrative of the evening beginning to crack. So when I see him relegated to a children's table while we discuss golf handicaps and European vacations, when I watch his service being dismissed as inappropriate dinner conversation, I see the man who taught me everything about honor and duty being treated like an inconvenience. Michael paused, looking directly at Margaret, then Tom, then each of their children in turn. It makes me wonder what we've forgotten about what really matters. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the soft ticking of Margaret's antique grandfather clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Every face in the room was turned toward Michael, but I could see the shock beginning to register, not just at his words, but at the truth they contained. Bradley was the first to break the silence. His voice smaller than it had been all evening. I didn't know about the Bronze Star, Uncle Joe. Margaret's perfectly composed facade was cracking. Her hands fluttered nervously with her napkin. And for the first time since I'd arrived, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Tom was staring at his coffee cup, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. His face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Emma, bless her innocent heart, broke the tension in the way only a child could. Grandpa Joe, you're a real hero, she announced, her voice filled with 8-year-old wonder. Like in the movies. Not like in the movies, sweetheart, I said gently, my voice rougher than I'd intended. Real soldiers are just people doing their job. Sometimes scary, sometimes boring, but always necessary. Jake had climbed down from his chair and come around to my side of the table. Can you tell us about the scary parts? He asked, his eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Before anyone could stop me, before Margaret could redirect the conversation or dismiss the topic as inappropriate, I found myself speaking. Maybe it was Michael's words still ringing in the air. Maybe it was the genuine interest in my grandchildren's faces, but something had shifted inside me. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore, I began, settling back in my chair. Most of the time, being a soldier meant taking care of your fellow soldiers, making sure everyone had what they needed, looking out for each other, working as a team. I was acutely aware that the main table had gone quiet, that the adults were listening despite themselves. Sarah had moved her chair slightly closer, and even Ashley had put down her phone. The day I earned that medal your mom told you about? I continued looking at Emma and Jake, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Our convoy was bringing supplies to a forward base in Kuwait. Medical supplies, food, equipment that soldiers needed to do their jobs safely. Tom cleared his throat. Joe, you really don't need to, actually. I think I do, I said, echoing Michael's words from earlier. And they deserve an honest answer. I took a breath, organizing thoughts I'd kept buried for decades. We were about halfway to our destination when we hit an IED. That's an improvised explosive device. A homemade bomb hidden on the roadside. The blast knocked our lead vehicle off the road and injured 3 soldiers. The room was completely still now. Even Margaret had stopped fidgeting with her napkin. Now, protocol said we should wait for backup, establish a perimeter, call for .net, call for medical evacuation. But Sergeant Rodriguez, he was just 22 years old, had a baby daughter back home. He was bleeding badly and going into shock. Sometimes protocol isn't enough. I could see that day clearly now, feel the desert heat, and taste the dust in the air. So I left my protected position and ran to the damaged vehicle, got Rodriguez out, carried him back to safety, then went back for the other wounded soldiers. It took 3 trips, and the whole time we were taking small arms fire from insurgents who'd been waiting for us. Emma's eyes were huge. Were you scared, Grandpa? Terrified, I admitted, but scared for my soldiers more than for myself. That's what leaders do. They take care of their people, even when it's dangerous. I glanced around the room, meeting each adult's eyes in turn. Sergeant Rodriguez made a full recovery. Went home to his daughter, watched her grow up, walked her down the aisle at her wedding last year. He still sends me Christmas cards. The weight of that truth settled over the room like snow. Here was something real, something that mattered. Beyond stock portfolios and vacation homes, a life saved, family kept whole, a young soldier given the chance to fulfill his dreams. Jessica was wiping her eyes. Uncle Joe, I had no idea. We never knew. Because he never talked about it, Michael said, his voice gentle now, but still carrying that underlying strength, because that's who he is. He doesn't boast about his service or demand recognition. He just lived his life with quiet dignity, contributing to his community, raising his family, honoring his commitments. Margaret finally found her voice, though it was softer than usual. Joe, we should have. I mean, the seating arrangement wasn't meant to be. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because we all knew exactly what it had meant. It's all right, Margaret, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. You didn't know because I never told you. Linda always said I kept too much to myself. Tom was looking at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years. Respect. Years of service, he said quietly. Bronze Star, Purple Heart. 2 Purple Hearts, Michael corrected. Dad never mentioned the second one. Shrapnel wound in Afghanistan when he was 45 years old. Most men his age were settling into desk jobs. But he was still volunteering for deployments because his experience could help keep younger soldiers safe. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. Dad, we're so proud of you. We've always been proud of you. Bradley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. For a moment I thought he was leaving, making some excuse to escape the uncomfortable conversation. Instead, he walked around the table and extended his hand to me. Uncle Joe, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. We all do. Your service, your sacrifice. It's the foundation that everything else rests on: our freedom, our prosperity, our ability to sit here and take it all for granted. I shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of a man who was learning something important about himself. You don't owe me anything, Bradley. That's not why we served. Maybe not, he replied, but we owe it to ourselves to remember. What you and others like you have given. Margaret had composed herself enough to speak clearly. Joe, would you please join us at the main table? I'll make room. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. My family, flawed and human, but trying to do better. The children were looking at me with new eyes, seeing not just their grandfather, but a man with a history worth knowing. The adults were grappling with their own assumptions, their own comfortable narratives about success and worth. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair at the card table, I think I'm fine right here. Emma was telling me about her Christmas play, and Jake wants to show me his new book about dinosaurs. I smiled at their disappointed faces. But maybe next time, we could set up one big table, big enough for everyone, regardless of age. Some of the best conversations happen when different generations sit together. Margaret nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Next year. Well, we'll do things differently. As the evening wound down and the conversation resumed, now including questions about my teaching career, my volunteer work at the VA, even my modest vegetable garden, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just inclusion, but genuine interest in who I was and what I'd done with my life. When it came time to leave, the goodbyes were different too. Longer, warmer, with promises to stay in better touch. Bradley asked if he could visit sometime, said he wanted to hear more stories about military leadership. Jessica hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for your service, Uncle Joe." As we walked to the car, Michael fell into step beside me again. "I'm sorry it took so long, Dad," he said quietly. "I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up?" "When it mattered," I replied. "That's what counts." The snow was still falling as we drove away, but somehow the night felt warmer. In the rearview mirror, I could see Margaret's house growing smaller, its windows still glowing with warm light. But now, I was part of that warmth, no longer looking in from the outside. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to next Christmas.